All right, so now that we're sending back the JWT to the user, we kind of know if they're logged in or not, right? If they have that token stored in context, we know that they're logged in, and we can use that information to dynamically show different elements. So let's just try to make it sure you can't add anything to your cart unless you've logged in. Again, this isn't probably how a real e-commerce site works, but we're just trying to learn here. If you want to do an e-commerce site, I definitely recommend that you check out Shopify if you need to actually sell something. But just for the sake of it, let's try to only allow people to add stuff to the cart if they are logged in, and they can browse when they're not logged in. Again, that doesn't really make sense, but we can kind of just do that just for fun. So we have like these buttons here that we probably shouldn't allow the user to add to their cart unless they made an account and logged in. And up here, like we're displaying a cart, which we probably shouldn't unless they log in as well. And we should probably, when they're not logged in, show like a log in button or a log out button. I've seen some sites where you have to actually like register a subscription to be able to buy products. So this is kind of a real life use case, but it's not the typical use case. Typically you add to the cart and then later you can go to your checkout and then register an account, add in your address and stuff like that. But let's just go ahead and try this out. Make sure everything's running. All right, so let's go back to the UI, and we want to first maybe hide this cart from the header if they're not logged in. So let's go to the header component, and let's just go ahead and find where we are rendering that cart icon out, or the cart text, which happens to be here. And what we can do is we can say if the user is logged in, so like if they have a token, then we could basically hide or show this. So let's just go ahead and do like a conditional and say user.user. If there's a token, then we will display that link. Okay, so again, we are not logged in, so the cart thing kind of goes away. But what we can show you here is that if you actually have a token and you log in, it should come back. But unfortunately, I don't think we have the ability to log in. We made the ability to register, but we don't have a login page. So let's kind of switch gears real quick and let's make a login page. It's going to look very similar to the register page. And right now we're kind of like duplicating a lot of code. So I think we should probably clean this code up as well. So let's just make a login page here, and then we can kind of clean this stuff up. I'm going to paste all of the same contents that was on the register page and just basically put it in the login page. And the main difference with this login page is that you don't want to hit the register endpoint. You just want to hit login, and this functionality is basically going to stay consistent with how we did it before. Maybe change the title here to login, and maybe call a method called login instead of login register user. I'm going to say login user, and then down here I'm going to have a login button. So this is almost identical to the register page. We could probably find ways to clean this up, and let me just think about that in a second, but let's actually add this page to our app.js. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy that register and change it to a login. Make sure this is login page and auto import that. So now we should be able to go back to our UI and go to our login route, and we will see the login form. So this should work out of the box, assuming that we did everything correctly. So let's go to the network tab and make sure if I type in like bob@example.com and type in the password, click login, that should hit the login endpoint. And then we should also get back a token and a user like we did with the register endpoint. So everything's working perfectly fine here. But what we want to do is notice that this isn't showing the cart button, but it probably should be. So let's try to figure out why that is not showing up, because I mean, the token and user is in the context right now. I'm not sure why it would not be showing up. So let's go back to our login page and maybe look. So we call set user here, and we are setting the token and the user on that state, which is stored in context. And the header is trying to use that user context here. So we should have access to user dot token. So if user.token is defined. So we had a little bug here. Now the issue is that when I save this file, it's going to restart my browser and I have to like relog in. Actually, it didn't. I think it did hot module reloading. So everything is actually working pretty good. So let's also add a log out button, right? If the user is logged in, we want to give them the ability to log out of their account. So let's go back to the header, and I'm going to say basically the opposite. I'm going to say if there is no token, we can have a log out button. And what that's going to do is basically take you, or it's going to call a, maybe you could just call a logout function. You can also just go to a logout page. This is what I like to do a lot as well. Just have a logout page so that if you navigate to it, that's where it runs your logout functionality, and then it might redirect you to the dashboard. So let's just do that approach. Save this, and we should get a logout button to show up. Oh, I'm sorry. This needs to be if there's a user token, show a logout page. I had my Boolean condition kind of switched. So now we have a logout button. If you click it, it should take you to a /logout route. We don't have a logout page, so let's just go ahead and make one real quick. So logout page, nothing really special about this page. It really isn't going to display much, but we need a page to be able to run some on-mount functionality. But before we do that, let's go back to the app, and I'm going to make a logout. A logout page. Sorry, my voice cracked there. So make a logout page, auto import that, go back here. And again, the whole purpose of this logout page is to just run some type of like logic. We just need to do a use effect so that when this page mounts, we can actually just clear out that context. So remember the Boolean that's basically, or not the Boolean, the data that we have on the UI that we can use to know if we're logged in or logged out is in the user context. So let's just go ahead and import user and set user, and I'm going to say use context. And I am going to grab this from the user context, which happens to be in the app. My auto import is working perfectly now. Usually it doesn't work that well, but it's working really good on this part of the series for some reason. So I'm happy about that. So basically when this component mounts, if you go to the logout page, really all you want to do is set this equal to an empty object. Kind of like we had it set up when we first initialized it up here. Remember we had some state for user state and we initialized it to an empty object. So everything should be good. And we can kind of verify this. If we save this, this will actually clear the state out, and we'll probably see in the header the button go away. But I think we also want to do like a router. Maybe we want to redirect the user to the dashboard. So I'm going to say bring in the router. So const router is equal to, oh, I'm sorry, it's called history. So const history is equal to use history. Make sure I auto import that. And then I'm going to say history.push, and I'm going to go to the dashboard again. All right, so all of this logic was just so that we can basically click that logout button, redirect to a logout page, and then have that log us out of the app. Now, it didn't actually do what I thought it was going to do. So maybe I have to refresh the page. But you'll notice there's an issue. When you refresh the page, the login information is basically taken away. Right? The app didn't store the login information anywhere, so I have to go back and log back in, and we don't have a login button. So for right now, let's just add a quick login button. I'm going to basically do this. If there is no token, we're going to say display a login link, and that'll take you to the login route. Right? So now we should have a login button. You can click it. We could do bob@example.com, type in the password, we can log in, and now that context has stored the token. We see a logout button. We have our cart. Let's test. If we click on log out, it should take us to a logout page, and it did. And then it executed that use effect here. It cleared out our user token and our user object, and then it redirected us back to the dashboard. So cool. That's all working good. Again, one thing I mentioned that the app isn't working very well is because if you refresh this browser, your login state is not persisted. It's kind of cleared out. So this is why a lot of people store the JWT in local storage, or they store it in a cookie from the server. But the easiest thing, honestly, is just put it in local storage and make sure your token is short-lived and refresh it. So if like you could have your token last 5 minutes, make sure you refresh that token every so often, and don't store the refresh token in your local storage because that is actually a bad thing to do. The refresh token should not be accessible in local storage, but let's just try to do that. Let's go to the login page and see if we can figure this out. So when you log in, you're setting user here, which is basically setting a token, and it's also setting the user. So what would be cool is if anytime this user state changes, remember where this is defined, if you go back to app, anytime this user state changes, it'd be cool if we could just mount that or store that in local storage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a use effect, and I'm going to basically say whenever a user state changes, we are going to say local storage dot, I think it's put, it's set item, and I'm going to say the key. You don't know how local storage works. You basically, it's a key value pair. So key value store, you can store a key, I'll say like user, and then I can store a JSON stringified version of the user state. Index 0. All right, remember this is an array that has two elements. The first element is going to be the actual user object, and then the second element is going to be the setter. All right, so now we're going to be basically setting this user on local storage. And the other thing that we want to do is when this application loads, we want to try to fetch this user from local storage as well. So let's try doing that. Let's go ahead and instead of saying use state as an empty object, you can actually pass this a function here, and we can actually compute that like so. So instead I can say return, I can say get item. I want to say if this is defined, so if there is a user in local storage, then I'm going to say if this is defined, then we are going to say return json.parse user in local storage. Else just return an empty object. So again, what we're doing is saying if this happens to already exist in local storage because you logged in and you set this, then just grab it from local storage and use that as your initial user state. Otherwise, just return an empty object here. And we could probably simplify this code quite a bit. Instead, what I could say is just return and then check if this is defined. Then I'm going to basically return this using a ternary, otherwise do that. Okay, so this is a little bit cleaner code in my opinion. You can actually see that if this is set, we're going to use it. Actually, maybe this isn't better. Let me go back. Let me go back. So I could do this instead. I got too ahead of myself. If this is set, then I'm going to parse it. Otherwise, I'm going to return an empty object. So that's a little bit cleaner. And let's just test this. We kind of wrote a lot of code, so we want to verify this code's actually doing what we think it does. Let's go back and let's see. Use effect is not defined, so let's go ahead and auto import that. Oops, auto import like this. And let's see, refresh the page. It's still not saying it found use effect. Why would this? Use effect is not defined. I forgot to save the page. Use effect is still not defined. How? Okay, I don't know what's going on, but I had to do a hard refresh. So let's actually verify this. In your Chrome browser or Firefox, there's typically a way to look at local storage for the URL that you're on. So on Chrome, go to application here, click local storage, click on your browser, and you'll see that user is equal to an empty object. Okay, let's just log in. Let me do bob@example.com and click the login button. And you'll notice that when I hit that login button, the user token and username was actually stored in local storage down here. So now when I refresh the page, it should grab that token from local storage every time, and we should be good. It should kind of use that every single time. So let's just verify. If I delete this from local storage, make sure when I refresh the page, it logs everything out. Yeah, I think this works fine. There may be a bug in this logic. There's something that, there's like a red flag. I just can't put my finger on what's actually wrong with it. but I think it's working fine. So now you've persisted that token in the user to local storage. Now someone can log in and come back later and use your app if they close their browser. But just remember that JWT tokens are supposed to expire after a short amount of time, so you do have to like refresh them. But let's also do some more logic. So the add to cart button we should probably hide unless they are logged in. So let's figure out, we go to the dashboard, or it's not the dashboard, it's called the product page. We could find where we are doing that. So let's look for add to cart, and we only want to show this button if they are logged in. So again, we'd have to use the user context here to be able to know if they are logged in or not. So I'm going to say is logged in will be a boolean that we pass in. And we are going to say if we are logged in, let's just go ahead and show the button. So it's just a really simple React conditional. If we're logged in, show the button. But we want to make sure that we actually pass that in as a property here. So is logged in is going to be equal to, and we probably just need to grab the user context here. So if you go up here, we could just say get user from the user context. And we're going to use that to know if we're logged in or not. So I'm going to go down here and say if user.token. In JavaScript, you can also do a double bang like this to kind of force this to be either true or false. This might be a little bit cleaner to do. But let's see if this works. So now if we're logged in, it should not show this add to cart button. I'm logged in, the button shows, I'm getting confused, but I need to log out to verify that the button goes away, and it does. And so at this point, I mean, like we kind of have done a lot of dynamic content based on if you're logged in or logged out. I think what we also should probably do is we need to protect some of these routes. So remember, we have like a create product route, which if you're not logged in and you have like a valid token, you probably shouldn't show this route. And then we could also do like role-based policies to verify something too. But let's just make this route private. So if you try to go to this page, it'll redirect you to the dashboard unless you're logged in. So let's go to the create product page. There's different ways you can do this. One way is you could just inside of here do like a use effect hook, check if you're logged in, and if you're not, redirect back to the dashboard. Another approach is you could just dynamically omit this route. Which one? Like don't render this route if they're not logged in. We could try doing that one. It might be easier to do it here because we do already have the user state. So what we could kind of do is, I think this will work. It might be a little hacky. We could say if the token is defined, then we will show that create product route. So right now, if I refresh the page, notice that create product doesn't even show anything. There is no component that displays when I try to go to that page because we're not logged in. So let's just go back and log in real quick. I'll do like bob@example.com and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now if I try to go to create product, we are logged in, the page shows fine, and they could kind of fill out the product information and submit it. But even though we just like hid this route, if someone's smart enough, they could still hit your backend and input that data because we haven't protected our backend from getting like that request. So we probably need to do that. I'm also going to remove this from the header because it's kind of tacky. Go to the header here and just remove that username. All right, there you go. So yeah, what I want to do again is kind of show you role-based authentication. So if you log in and you happen to have the role of like, let's say admin, then that's the only time that we should show this page or allow people to use this page. So let's go to our backend. I'm going to go to the index of the server, and notice here we have this endpoint where we can create new products. Basically what we want to do is we want to check to make sure that they have the correct role using role-based authentication, and then maybe throw an error if they have the wrong role. But we haven't even talked about how roles are kind of set up. Let's go into the register controller, and we need to basically attach different roles to our user based on the, let's say, email address. So we could just do something like something hard-coded for right now. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the user model, And I'm going to add a role here so that we can actually keep track of like what users have what roles. And then what we could do is we could basically say if a user has a role of admin, then we are going to allow this endpoint to be executed. So let's go ahead and go into the create products controller. Go ahead and delete that console log. I don't even know why it's in there. So there's a couple things that I haven't done yet. So I'm kind of jumping around and I apologize for that. But right now, when someone were to create a product in the front end, that's going to do a network request. But right now, we don't actually send any information about like who made the request, right? We just kind of send a request and the backend has no information about who's sending the request. So what we want to do at this point is we actually need to send over that JWT inside the payload or the header, and then the backend can process that. So let's go ahead and go back to the UI real quick to the create products page. And what we're going to do here is we're going to pass a third argument here where we can set headers, I believe. And we can say set a header called authorization, and that is going to have something called bearer, and then I could pass it the token. So user.token. All right, so we don't have access to user because we haven't brought in that context here. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it in. So I'm going to say const users equal to use context, and then I'm going to say user context, import that. So whenever we make this post request, we include that token in the header, and our backend can actually check that header. So let's go back and just do something real quick here. I'm just going to do a request and just show you what happens. So I'm going to click submit, and we are going to look at that request here. So I haven't talked about request headers, but anytime you do a request to the backend, there's a bunch of key value like things that you can pass. So here, request headers. All of these are used by your server to kind of change how it operates. And some of it's just metadata so that you can kind of be more descriptive about who's doing the request. But one standard that we do in web development is that you have an authorization header and you pass in the JWT inside of this header. So now this is actually sent to the backend, and we can go to our backend code and process that. So if we go to our create product controller, we can actually get the header. So I can say const authorization is equal to rec.headers.authorization. And let me just console log that and show you that I can actually like use that. So let me save this and go back to my server and clear it. And I'm going to show you if I go back and just create a product here, click submit, go to our back, and you'll see that that same header that we saw in Chrome right here is accessible on our server, and then we can kind of further do processing to verify this. All right, so the first thing we want to do is we want to kind of split this bearer thing out. What a lot of people do is you can just do like const token is equal to authorization dot splice, and I believe you can just pass it 6, and that'll take all of these characters from this space forward all the way to the end. I think it's slice or splice 6, or is it slice? I think it's slice. It might be substring. I don't even know. We'll find out real quick. So let me just print out token. This might crash if you don't actually pass a bearer. So let me just go here, click submit, and see what happens. And we are actually getting back, I think we actually got back an extra space. Let me do 7. Make sure if I do that, we get back the full token. Yeah, so this is good. There's a lot of ways you can do this. You could, split it by spaces and then get the second thing, or you could do substring 7, but just make sure you have a lot of try catches around this in case someone decides that they want to send a bad header and that crashes your backend. But now we have the token. So remember in the last couple of parts, I talked about how you need to verify the token. So here is our opportunity. We can kind of bring in that JSON web token package, and we can call jwt.verify and pass it the token. And then also we can pass it that my super secret password here. So let's just go ahead and just move that over. This is kind of sloppy. We need to make this an environment variable, but we could just, right now, let's just go ahead and export that. So I'm gonna say like const secret, yeah, I'll just say const secret or export. I'll say exports.secret string. And then I'll just do this. I'm just going to export it here. And I'm going to use that here real quick. So that when we sign it, and then also when we verify it, we can use that same secret string, just import it from login controller. And now we can verify using that secret string against a token. And this is a synchronous function. So if this happens to throw an exception, I believe, let's read the docs real quick. It says, it doesn't really say what it does. I think it will throw an exception if the token is bad. So what we can do is if someone tries to hit this endpoint and they have a bad token, it's going to throw an exception. And we can say res.status of 403. And then I could just say send authorization error. Something like that. All right, so let us test this out. The easiest way to test this out is actually just go to your UI, change your token to be something bad. Like I could just add an extra character here. And I think if I just do this request, you'll see that it does. Let's see if it actually did what I thought it was going to do. I might have to refresh my page first. Let me refresh the page so that it actually loads it from local storage. I'm going to hit that endpoint, and now you'll see that the endpoint threw a 403 error because I actually passed it a bad token, right? So when it hits this verify call, because I personally changed the token and made it bad, the server says, nope, this is not a good token. This didn't come from me. I'm the one who signed it and kind of verify that this is actually what it needs to be, but the user was trying to spoof it or change it. So the server throws an exception and we send back that 403 status code. And you can do various things in the UI, like show an alert or show something else when that happens. But just keep in mind that this is just for a demonstration. Go back, remove that D I added, and just save the page. And then if I click submit, everything should work fine. So again, what I mentioned at the start of this, JWT stuff, is we wanted to do role-based authentication, because right now anyone can just register an account and hit this endpoint and create products, but really we just want an admin to be able to do this. Okay, so if you remember, we added a role to that user model, and really what we just need to do is just go into our data here and find Bob. I think I'm logged in as Bob, and we could just add another value here and say role is admin. I think it's as simple as that. I could just save it. That should update Mongo. And now all I need to do is check that the token, when I decode it, actually has the role Bob. So I'm going to say const user is equal to that. I'm going to say if user.role is not equal to admin, then I'm also going to throw that authorization error here. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. I think this should work. This is going to return the JWT token, or the token that's been decoded. So you'll actually have the I might need to print this out. Let me print this out real quick because I don't think it's going to have what I think it has. Let me do this. Let me go ahead and move this terminal up, hit this endpoint, and this actually does not have the role. Okay, the role is not on Bob yet because we need to log out and log back in. Remember, the token is only generated when you log in or register. So we need to make sure we log out and log back in if we change something that's stored inside the payload of the token. All right, so we're logged in again. We should have a new token. Let's go to the create product page and just click on submit. And now you'll see that the user that came back here after we decoded the token and verified it actually has a role of admin. So now we say if you're an admin, you can create the product. All right, so that's a really basic role-based authentication, and this can get more complex if your application has many different roles. Some users only have access to some functionality in your site, but this is the gist of it. You basically just store the role in your token and, change or throw errors if they don't have the right permissions to hit that endpoint. And you can also use express middleware to do all this and not in the controller itself. But again, I'm just trying to keep it simple. And just to show you, let's log out and log in as the other person I have. I think I have someone else. I think it was wj@example.com. If I log in as this person, Notice that if I go to that create product page, the page still loads because we're not checking the role here. But one thing I'll notice, if I click submit, I'm still getting back that 403 error. It's not allowing me to hit this endpoint because my token has no role attached to it. And it also probably make a lot more sense to only show this page if you're an admin as well. So we can do that. If we go back to the create product page, actually not the create product page. If we go back to the app where all the router stuff is set up, we can actually make sure there's a token, and then we can say if user state 0.user.role is equal to admin. Let me go ahead and wrap these in parentheses and do it and. This is getting kind of sloppy. There's probably ways to make this more clean and refactor it, but I'm just trying to show you that now the page should not even load for this WDJ user because he doesn't even have a role attached to his token. And just to show you that, if I go and grab his token, or I could just show you this, the user doesn't have that role at all. He doesn't have the admin role. So that page in the UI won't even load for him. So yeah, I hope that was a good overview. We did some simple role-based authentication. We kind of dynamically displayed and kind of hid different elements on the page based on if you're logged in and what role you're in. And we did some authentication on the React router to kind of show routes based on what your role is and if you're logged in. Cool. So I'm going to wrap this part of the series up. Stay tuned for the next part. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, but be sure to leave a comment and give me a thumbs up if this has helped you in any way at all. Have a good day.